Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Playbook podcast. And in our special Women's Euros preview series, we are right now on to Sweden in our chat so far, and we're privileged to have with us Philip O'Connor, a Stockholm-based journalist and broadcaster whose storytelling spans continents and causes. From front row seats at Olympic Games and World Cups to deep dives into political movements and societal change, Philip has reported for top outlets like Reuters and lent his voice to Irish and global media. A passionate mental health advocate and entrepreneur, he is equally at home unpacking the nuances of sport as he is exploring the human stories behind the headlines. To join us in bringing Philip as he brings his unique lens on Sweden's sporting culture, social fabric, and inspiring people who make it all happen. So thanks for joining us, Philip. How are you doing?
It's my pleasure, and thank you very much for that lovely introduction. It's great to be here on the channel. It's great to see new channels starting and talking about issues like this, not just women's sport and sport in general, but also the intersection between diplomacy and politics and business and all these things as well. So I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, I think let's get on to I think the question which is not it's on the top of both me and Sai's mind. So you're an Irishman who's in Sweden, of course. So what got you into Swedish football or Swedish women's football for that matter?
Well, I was always interested in football in general, Ashish, and it was something that I wrote about, and I worked with community radio back in Ireland. And then in 1994, just before the World Cup, where Sweden came third, I met a Swedish girl in a bar one night, and I made the mistake that all Irish fellas do, and I fell in love with her. And then she said, a couple of years later, she said, "Would you like to try living in Sweden for a year or two?" That was 26 years ago. I haven't seen the sun during the winter since. And, I just sort of moved over to Sweden then in 1999 and started up. But it's a great country with a great footballing history. And it also has a great history of women's football as well, because when we look at European women's football, and we look at the global women's game, certain countries have been sort of out in front, in the vanguard. And Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Iceland, Finland, because of the fact that they had primarily social democratic governments after the Second World War, they gave these opportunities to women that maybe women didn't have in other places. Of course, during the Second World War in England, women's football was everywhere because all the men were off fighting the war. And then when they came back, they were banned from playing football until the early 1970s. So I wouldn't say that Swedish football or Swedish women's football has had a huge advantage compared to men's football in the country. But certainly if you compare it to places like Italy and Spain and Portugal, that many of us would consider sort of footballing superpowers, that they did have that advantage over them. And of course, that's reflected in Norway are one of the few teams to win the World Cup. Germany have done very well there. Sweden have 2 Olympic silver medals, and they have a whole host of finals and quarterfinals and near misses. And of course, that one win in 1984. So it's an easy thing to fall in love with as well, because Scandinavians, you can't separate the sport from the society. So this idea of equality is always there. It's like, what are we doing for women? What are we doing for men? And they don't talk about it as in $1 for you is $1 for me. That's not what they mean at all. It's the equality of opportunity. And I found those discussions fascinating in my 26 years living in Sweden and covering both men's and women's football.
Yeah, I think in general, in Scandinavia, if you look at those, there are those polls which come every year, right? Which ranks the most happiest nations, and most of the Scandinavian countries are always generally at the top of those lists. I think all of them will generally be in the top 10 in whatever order in which they are. So it makes sense. And I think an interesting point is, I think in Sweden, equality, gender equality, or in Scandinavia for that matter, I don't think gender equality is it's a given. It's not thought of as you have to do it. I think it's ingrained within the society, if I am to understand right.
It has become very much more of a default. So if you look back over how this developed, right? And if you look to my father-in-law, who was a carpenter, a man who worked with timber on a building site, and this kind of thing. And when he was young, and when my wife was born and our younger brother was born, he wasn't the kind of guy to take paternity leave and to walk around the place pushing the pram and that kind of thing. But he was the last of that generation, because the Swedish government introduced parental leave. And then they decided that because men like him weren't taking that parental leave, they split it down the middle. And they said, okay, the girls, you're going to get plenty of time here to be at home with your child. But they said to the men, you've got to take this time because you can't give this to your wife. It used to be given to the whole family, and now you can't just do that. You've got to take a certain amount of this time. I think in total, it's 450 days per child with some form of payment from the state, and it's usually enough to get by on. So it's very much rooted in that idea of equality. And when they needed to, they've changed the rules to change the behaviours. And one of the first things you will do, or you will find, if you start a soccer club or any sort of a sporting organisation, if you put up, like in your local supermarket or your local restaurant, if you put up a poster saying, I'm starting a soccer team, the first thing you will do is you will get a girl or a woman mailing you and saying, what are you doing for women and girls? Like, what's their section going to look like? And they are onto you straight away in your local area, looking for those opportunities. And the municipalities and the people who own the stadiums and the people who own the training pitches and who own the goals and everything else that we need to play, they insist as well that there has to be that level of equality, that you have to have that top of mind. Now, there's a sort of a global struggle that I think we're all aware of, that around about the age of 15, an awful lot of young girls stop playing sports. It tends to be a little bit older for boys, but around about 15, girls stop playing sports. And they haven't quite cracked that problem yet, but they are very much aware of it. And there is that. It is a very sort of a sporting orientated society in Scandinavia in general. They love winter sports and cross-country skiing and Olympic handball and soccer. And they're very good at them because they recognize that sport is part of a sort of a rounded education as well. So when I went to the Christian Brothers, a Catholic school in Ireland, we played the Gaelic sports of Gaelic football and hurling, and nothing else existed. In fact, we weren't allowed to play soccer at that time, and you were allowed to play for like 45, maybe 90 minutes a week. I would have played all day if they'd let me. I actually would have gone to school more if they'd let me play football, but they wouldn't let me do that. But the difference then between that and Scandinavia is that there's an awful lot more encouragement. Now, again, I don't want to sort of paint this picture that everything's rosy in the garden in Scandinavia. It's not. There are challenges in terms of getting investors to put their money into the top flight clubs in the top city in Norway and in the Damallsvenskan in Sweden, that kind of thing. It's always easier to sell a men's team than it is a women's team. It's still like that. But people at least are conscious of it and they're trying to work towards solutions there.
Yeah, and I think it's going back to the point you made earlier about all the Scandinavian countries making that step quite early on in the women's game itself. As we've all seen with the unofficial World Cups that were held, Denmark was on top almost every time. And then the initial few Euros and the World Cups, it was always Norway, Sweden that were dominating. So, but the I wouldn't say Sweden has fallen off a little bit. They still make it to the top four in almost every competition. But how do you think? I'm sorry. How do you think off the field Sweden has evolved in terms of women's football over the past decade or so?
Yeah, they've really struggled their side because what happened was that for so long, Sweden and Norway and Denmark, Sweden was the place to go. Mata, the greatest Brazilian player of all time, she played in Sweden, away up the north in Umeå. And if you think I was bad for the darkness, she was 100 times worse where she was living. So it was, but that was where you went. That was where you could get paid a full-time wage. I remember being with Olivia Skog, who played on the wing for Sweden. She's not in this squad now, but she must have 150 caps for Sweden. And she was able to earn a full-time wage in Sweden. Now, the whole team wasn't full-time, but there would be 3 or 4 players. Victoria Sandell Svensson would have been in there, you would have had, there was a whole heap of players in there who would have, that was how they made their money. Now, they would go then, they would play maybe in Australia or in the US when the season wasn't on, and so that was the little sort of professional circuit. But what's happened in recent years, and the big threat now, is that the Damallsvenskan, which used to be the jewel in the crown along with the Bundesliga Frauen, that is no longer the case, because a bottom club in the Women's Super League in England, a Brighton or a Leicester or a Crystal Palace, can pay more money than a top club in the Damallsvenskan. Now, they obviously have well-paid players. There's one player who's not in the squad now, Felicia Schroeder, who plays for BK Häcken, and she's supposed to be earning an awful lot of money. Now I haven't been able to confirm it, so I'm not going to say a number. She's getting well paid, as far as I know, in the new contract that she signed. But Sweden has very much become, and that's the surprise with Schroeder, is that she didn't go to the Bundesliga or to Italy or to Spain, because she's a very talented young girl. But that's the challenge that they have faced, and they're hanging in there at the moment, right? Because they're desperately trying to keep the domestic setup going, but they have become a little bit of a feeder league. And there's no better club to look at than maybe Chelsea there, because you had Zeciro Musovic, a fantastic goalkeeper who spent years pretty much on the bench and coming in and out. Before her, there was Hedvig Lindahl, another great goalkeeper who had 180 odd caps for Sweden. And you have Johanna Rytting Connerid, who's one of the most exciting attacking players in the world. The minute they're seen to be good enough their agents and their advisors and their families are saying, right, we have to go to England. And I've said it to some players too, because sometimes you will have a style of play that doesn't attract attention, but football people will realize how good you are. And there's more money to be made now playing in Germany or in England in particular, because people in Sweden watch an awful lot of English football. So that's really the struggle. But what's great to see is they're still hanging in there. So if you go back over recent years, Hammarby, the Swedish champions, they managed to play in the Champions League against St. Pölten from Austria. They played Barcelona, they played Manchester City. Did they get beaten fairly handsomely? Yes. But those players learned so much from those experiences. Like, I spent most of my footballing career sitting on the bench, right? And that actually made me a better footballer than I would have been if I just stayed at the bottom level, you know? So I haven't played that many games, but I feel I learned more about the game. And when you play against players who are better than you have no choice but to learn. If you have talent and you're reasoning, hang on a second, this game is going so fast around me. What do I have to do to keep up? And that is where the Swedish league is at the moment. They're hanging on. They're hanging on by their fingertips. But time will tell. I think they'll be able to keep going, because I think every club, every league, every sport needs farmer leagues. It needs places where players can go to develop for 1 or 2 or 3 years, where they know they'll get game time. You're wearing an Arsenal shirt there, side. Kira Cooney-Cross is a perfect example of a player who came from there. Stina Blackstenius also got plenty of Champions League experience and now playing up front and scoring the winner in a Champions League final. So there's definitely a purpose to Sweden. Will they ever dominate the Champions League and get to the last four the way they did previously? I have a hard time seeing it, not unless somebody invests a vast amount of money. But they definitely have a very valuable place in that ecosystem that they're trying desperately to hang on.
Yeah, no, I think you do make a great point. I think we've also seen the likes of Kristen Press and Ali Krieger also making their way over to Sweden, and that helped them develop their careers and earn a permanent spot in their in the US national team. And like you mentioned, I think the Swedish league is becoming more of a place where the other leagues, the clubs from the other leagues, look to poach talent from, like how Arsenal at the beginning of last season, they picked up Rosa Kafaji mainly because they didn't want anybody else picking her up. And she's still developing, and there's not sure what's going to happen to her in the next season, but that's one pretty good example of that.
I'll tell you something, that is an extremely talented kid, and I wasn't too impressed when she went to Arsenal, because you see what happens when they go to an Arsenal or a Chelsea is that they become one of 5 or 6 targets. I think that maybe Vivian Miedema had said that she wasn't coming back then, but if you look, Alessia Russo is ahead of her, Blackstenius is ahead of her, you know, there's so many players there. And at the time, and again, she needs to be playing. Now, she's playing every day against world-class players. A friend of mine played 1 league game for Manchester United in the men's team. And again, it goes back to that point of you will improve playing against better players. But at the end of the day, nothing beats competition. And I don't mean reserve league competition, or I don't mean under 21 competition. I mean going out there in the Damallsvenskan or in the Women's Super League or in the Euros 2025 and actually putting it on the line, putting everything on the line, because we're going to have 3 group games here. If Spain lose their first game here, that throws everything out of whack, right? They have to win their next 2 games. So these games really matter in a way that few games do in a global sense. And I think Rosa Kafaji needs to be playing those games. I think she probably would have been better off maybe, and she'll kill me for saying this, but I would have loved to have seen her go to a Brighton, for example, or an Aston Villa to learn from Rachel Daly, or maybe even stay another year in Sweden the way Felicia Schroeder has chosen to do, because I do think that, you know, this is the reason we go to school when we're young people and we're teenagers, and then we go to universities in our late teens and early 20s, because that's when we can absorb all this knowledge. Our bodies are growing and changing, and we can craft and mould footballers out of this, but you can't mould them if you're sitting at the back of the bus every Sunday, and if you're sitting at the end of the bench every Sunday. And that's why I think Rosa Kafaji is absolutely going to be one of the top 10 players in the world in the coming years, but she has to play.
Yeah, we did see a similar story with Denmark's Catherine Kuhl, who also came to Arsenal but wasn't able to develop over there. She wasn't getting enough game time and all of that, and ultimately had to move elsewhere almost permanently.
Yeah. Another good example of that is at Manchester City, because City, Arsenal, Chelsea, they have a lot of money, so they can take in players on okay wages. You know, the girls are okay. They're not hungry or anything like that. But Julie Blackstad, who played left back, left wing back at the last tournament for Norway, didn't have a great time, but because Julie had never played left back before. But she was at Manchester City and she just never got the chance to make that breakthrough. There was just too much noise, and then there was a hassle with Chloe Kelly, and you know, because not between Julie and Chloe Kelly now, but this was going on in the club, and Vivian Miedema and all these things. And then she left and she went to Hammarby. Now she's I would say she's probably the best player in the Damallsvenskan at the moment, right? So she left and she went to Hammarby. She went on loan to Häcken first, then transferred full time to Hammarby, and now she didn't make the squad here. I'm very disappointed in Gemma Granger for not bringing her here because she's such a great player. And both the goals that Norway conceded to Sweden the other night actually came down the left hand side where Julie should be, you know. But it remains to be seen. But that is a player who decided, okay, I'm running out of time here. I'm running out of opportunities. I can't just be, you know, the only person who gets away with doing that is a third choice goalkeeper. Those guys can be millionaires if it's in men's football, you know, and you can never play a game, but you made millions through because you just need that safe pair of hands. But you're competing with, in some cases, 25, 26, 27 outfield players. And that's very, very difficult. So that's why I would say, I'd love to see Rosa maybe go on loan, unless they say something to her this summer after the Euros where they go, okay, kid, you're going to get this chance. You're going to play in the League Cup. You're going to play in the FA Cup, you know, that kind of thing. Because I do think that she needs games to develop. And that actually goes for pretty much every player. Players have become much better at managing their own development and careers because they're getting better advice. Previously, it was families who would advise them. But now, because there's a little bit of money there, agents are getting in there, and there's some very, very good ones out there. You know, so I'd say we'll see a lot of change, not just in Scandinavian football, but in football in general once this Euros is over, as people look for that game time that's going to make it better.
Yeah, definitely. I think like one point which you can make also in an inverse way also, like in a way now with the proliferation of all the big English clubs, right? Like with the dominance of the English clubs, it could lead to some of their talent coming on loan to Damallsvenskan clubs. Like a very prominent example, like I'm a Chelsea fan, so Maika Hamano, she was on loan at Hammarby, and she came from Japan, and it allowed her to get used to Europe, and like it's like not like a halfway house, but I think like it's like a good middle ground for players from other countries, from other cultures to get used to the way they play in Europe. I think that is also another way in which Damallsvenskan can look to bring in those good young talent in a way, I guess.
And I think that's a point that they make to them as well, Ashish, because when they go to an Australian or a Japanese player, the girls know that the Damallsvenskan exists, and they know maybe 5 or 6 clubs, and they know Linköping and Rosengård and Tyresö from back in the day and that. And if you sell it to them, you say, okay, we're going to bring you over here. We're going to ask you to sign a 3-year contract, but we will sell you after 2 years if you're good enough. And what you will get for that is you will get to play every game. You will get good, solid, physical, tactical football against very, very well-drilled, fundamentally solid players, right? And it is, I would sort of compare it to American baseball, where you have what they call the major leagues, which is Major League Baseball, and then you have AAA, AA, and Single A. And, somewhere I think, the Damallsvenskan has become sort of AAA baseball now, because it is a very, very high level, but you still get the opportunity to make 1 or 2 mistakes. And it's funny, when you work with as much women's football as I do, you kind of have to switch from watching Barcelona against Chelsea in the Women's Champions League, and then the next day you're watching Häcken play in Norrköping, and you have to sort of change things around. You go, okay, you can't expect every ball to be hit with that precision and that pace and exactly what's needed, But in seeing that, you get to see where the opportunities are to develop for these players. And that's the thing, Hamano in particular, and Kira Cooney-Cross as well was another one. You could see when they came in how raw they were, but also how quickly they learned. So I definitely think, and that goes for the top series in Norway as well, because it's a little bit more physical. It may not be as sort of tactically and technically good as what Sweden is at the moment. But they're in Denmark. So there's a place for these leagues in the ecosystem at the moment. And a lot of people don't like it. A lot of people see them as being eclipsed. I don't see that at all. I think it's absolutely vital, because on the men's side, if you look at Dutch football, which has been a fantastic, like anybody who went to Ajax was given a great opportunity, a great education. The same thing at Feyenoord, the same thing at PSV Eindhoven, this kind of thing. And women's football is becoming like that, but instead of going to Netherlands, they're going to Scandinavia to get this footballing education.
Yeah, definitely. So I think one question which I feel is very important, I think I think the Swedish FA, they are partnered with this company called Spiideo. Pardon me for my pronunciation. So basically they partnered with them for like this live streaming and analytics. So how do you think like technology will help in transforming the broadcast experience and also in fan engagement, especially in women's football?
I think there's both advantages and disadvantages to that, Ashish, because you can prove absolutely anything with numbers, right? But nothing will tell me more than the eye test, okay? You can look at a player over, maybe 15, 20, 30 minutes over the course of 2 or 3 games or 2 or 3 months, and you can tell an awful lot about that player. You don't have to tell me how many times they touch the ball or in what area of the field. They will tell me who they are if I watch them enough, right? So on the injury side and on the physical fitness side and the sports management side and the conditioning side, it's vital, because we're essentially trying to get these people to perform at the absolute maximum every 4 days these days. And that needs a very scientific approach. My colleague Laurie Ewing, who's going to be covering the Euros here with me in Switzerland, has written 4 great articles about ACL injuries, because it's obviously still a big issue in the women's game. And of course, Hannah Glass, who we interviewed for one of those pieces, she's torn her ACL 4 times, right? So we need to embrace all that analysis. We need to embrace all of that sports science, but we cannot let it eclipse the fundamental spirit of what the game is, right? Football is a game of time and space, right? It's about solving problems of time and space. It's as much art and mathematics as it is sport. And if we stop and we focus on saying we're not getting enough balls into the box, we get, these teams have just played sort of long balls the whole time, the way Norway would have done maybe back in the 80s and 90s and won an awful lot of titles, right? And they would play on the percentages, as we call them. Now you have teams, both in men's and women's football, who are trying to play this possession-based game, but they're not good enough to do it. So you need to understand who you are, who your personnel is. But ultimately in women's football, I think we need to understand the potential of the players that are in front of us and of the groups of players that we have. I think Brighton did a very good job of that in the Women's Super League, certainly at the start of last season. It tailed off towards the end because they didn't have the depth and a little bit of bad luck with injuries. But I think they did a great job with the resources they have. Our job as journalists and as people who love football is not to create the best players in the world. It is to get the best out of every player in the world, right? And it does not matter to me if that player plays in the Damallsvenskan or the Women's Super League or the Champions League. It doesn't matter to me if she plays for Sweden, or she plays for India, or she plays for Australia, or if she never plays at all, if she only ever plays with her friends on the local car park or the local recreation centre, right? But that has to be our goal. Everything that feeds into that, everything we can learn from the elite level that can sort of trickle down to them, is a brilliant thing altogether. But again, I would never abandon all of the eye test or that field that we've all grown up with for the game in favour of just taking on statistics and science.
Yeah, no, that's quite right. And just building on the point you made about young girls playing, how do you think the Swedish FA has been actively investing in the youth academies and talent pathways as such, and what innovations do you think are being introduced to keep the young players engaged year round, especially given Sweden's harsh winters?
Well, that's the thing. So a few years ago, maybe 15 years ago, we got very into Brazilian futsal, this 5-a-side game that's played indoors, and it was tremendous because the only problem is that there's a lack of pitches and there's a lack of halls and that kind of thing for kids to play football in Sweden. And then there's a sporting calendar, if you like. So if you play soccer, it's kind of like, the way you may be with soccer and cricket in India. If you play soccer all summer, then you play ice hockey, or you play a sport called bandy, which is like outdoor ice hockey, and you play that all winter. And those things move into one another. So there's a lot of great research being done, but the same argument is happening pretty much everywhere, side. And that is, how do you coach players? How do you help players to discover and to learn the game, right? So an awful lot was made, 15, 20 years ago about academies. Everything was, St. George's Park. You got to get the best players young and get them together, put together. There's no scientific basis for a lot of that, right? So what there is a scientific basis for is young people engaging in multiple different sports, learning from them, and then going on to sort of pick, they might want to play ice hockey, or they might want to do cross-country skiing or biathlon, or they might want to play soccer. And I'll give you a really good example of that. I was at the Stockholm Derby 2 weeks ago today, as we're speaking, between Djurgården and Hammarby with the home team. And Therese Sessi Åsland, who is, again, she's one of the best midfielders of the Allsvenskan. She's not the Norway squad, and it's just beyond me how this can happen. But Therese is a former hockey player. When she was, 9, 10, 11 years of age, she would play ice hockey in the winter. And the way she shields the ball with her butt, it's hockey 101, and when you're used to watching ice hockey and you see this thing, in the same way that in Brazil you have capoeira, and you have Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and you have ways of learning to use your weight and ways of learning to use angles and this kind of thing to make your opponent weaker and to strengthen your own contributions to the game. And all of these things, and again, eye-hand coordination is something that you have in cricket. You'll have that in polo. You'll have that in so many different sports. So there's a lot of sort of research going into that now. So you have 2 strands. One is the public argument, because there will always be old people like me with grey beards who go, everybody should do it the way we did it when I was young. And we'd run up a mountain, and then we'd sleep outdoors, and then we'd run down the other side for 6 months. And then we'd only touch the ball in the very first game of the season, And then there's the way you should be doing it. And again, I go back to the point I made that our job is not to produce the best players in the world. It's to bring out the best in every player in the world. And that does not matter if it's for 5 minutes or for 5 years or for an international career. And that little paradigm shift now, you're seeing a lot of what they call spontaneous football now in Sweden. In the area where I live in the north of Stockholm, the local hall opens at about 9 o'clock on a Friday night. And the same thing on a Saturday night. And kids just turn up. And somewhere there'll be a guy who's slightly older, and he has a ball, and he has a pump, and he has some vests. And he splits the kids up into teams, and the winners stay on. And if you go to that hall any Friday or Saturday night, my friends, you will see brilliant football. You will see guys doing tricks and dribbling and doing celebrations and doing all sorts of things that you just never expect from kids playing pickup soccer. And these guys then, they go on, and local clubs see them and say, okay, come play for my team. Oh, are you playing any organised soccer? No, okay. Some kids want to do that. One of the best players I ever played with, he didn't want to do that, So he just stuck and he played with his friends on Friday night. He had a delightful time doing that, So I do think that the Swedes are looking very much at the structural aspect of it, but they are discovering the more playful element of it as well. Because remember, sport is essentially adults in play. I know the stakes can be very high, but that really is what it is we're going to be watching at Euro 2025.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I think that point which you make, right? Like, in the summers, you play like the summer sports, you could say, like your football and etc. And how in the winter, so you're keeping the connection with sport throughout the year, right? That's the basic. I think the basic principle behind doing that. I'm guessing you want to keep children connected to sport in any way possible, and that's why you adapt whatever it is. And I think that's such a cool point, and it's something which a lot of countries, which look, we live in India for that matter, and we, I mean, I'm sorry to say we have underachieved compared to our population. Like, we should be doing much better in a lot of sports compared to that. And then you see countries like Sweden, like the Scandinavian countries, the Balkan countries for that matter, which are able to produce, relative to their population, they're able to produce like these great players, great basketball players, great football players, great individual athletes for that matters. And I think that's so brilliant to see, from that perspective, I feel, Philip.
Well, it's that point about Norway. 5 million people, half the year in darkness, and one of the only teams to win the World Cup alongside Japan, Spain, Germany, and there's one or two more that I can't remember, but there's very few nations have won the Women's World Cup, but Norway did it. And Norway have been there. They were in the European Championship final in 2013 at the Friends Arena in Stockholm. I was there and watched the game. They have an incredibly talented squad, and they have so many players. Now, I've lifted 2 Norwegian players there, but there's so many. There's maybe 40 great players that would have every right to be in their squad at the Euros, But that is, I think, and I think part of it is cultural as well, Ashish, because cricket is so dominant at times in Asia, especially in India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and that. And it can be passive, right? So much of what we enjoy about cricket is actually talking about cricket, and it's talking about the new formats, and it's on every newspaper and every TikTok and every YouTube channel, apart from this wonderful YouTube channel, only talks about cricket in that way. But the idea of getting kids to actually do this and to do the sport themselves, so to be active participants in sport. And I often explain it to kids by saying, the more you play the game, the more you're going to understand what it is when you look at Cristiano Ronaldo, Lionel Messi, whoever your favorite player happens to be, if it's Mata, if it's, Khalid Akul, whoever it is, you're going to get that because you put yourself in their shoes. You're seeing what they see, okay? You might be seeing it a lot slower, and it may not be nearly as good, but that's it. That's the game. There's a goal at either end. It hasn't changed in my lifetime, and it's not likely to. The ball's the same size. The rules are the same wherever you go in the world. And that in itself is an education. And I found it so enriching to look at sport in that way. Like years ago, I started covering mixed martial arts, and I started to do Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and I learned so much just from wrestling with people in these big pajamas and that. You have a whole different understanding for it. And I'm still doing it 9 years later. Still playing soccer, because I don't want to sit there and look at a sport and talk about a sport that I don't really understand. I love to watch cricket, but I have no idea what the bowlers do. I have no idea what the bats. I have no idea how to put the infield, the outfield. No idea about that. I do love to see Ireland beating England, but sure, who doesn't? So but that's the level. If I had to sort of write about that, I think I'd have to go and sort of stand at the end of a crease and let somebody throw a few balls at me. But being an active participant in something, because again, there's so much to be had from sport. I've said it before that without sport, I wouldn't have a job, I wouldn't have a friend, I wouldn't have a pastime. It wouldn't have brought us together for this conversation here. And these valuable little moments that we have stretching across continents when we gathered around something like women's football is so valuable. But bring that over into the physical realm as well, and it's good for not just the mental, but also the physical health of young people.
And you're an Irishman who stays in Sweden, and you have a very aptly called blog or website called Irishman in Stockholm, by the way. And you act like a bridge for the Irish diaspora within Sweden. So I wanted to ask, like, how football, not just football, or sport for that matter, can act as a bridge, between communities, widespread communities for that matter. So, like, it acts as a bridge for cultural exchange or integration, especially for immigrant communities. As you can see, a lot of events are happening all around the world, especially the unfortunate events which are happening in Palestine, for that matter. And I think a lot of Scandinavian countries do have a lot of Palestinian immigrants who do end up playing for the teams over there as well. So I think, how can you like speak to that?
But they lost 5-4 to a team of guys from Mexico. And this is where we meet. We meet on the football pitch. And next week it could be guys from Palestine, or it could be a team of Kurdish guys, or a team of Somalis, or Eritreans, or a team of people from India. Although we're most likely to find them playing cricket in Sweden. Cricket has gone huge in Sweden now in the last 10 years. But that is, as you say, that is the bridge. And sport has always been that. And in particular, women's sport has been that. It's been very much a safe space for people to explore themselves and the things they share culturally, but also the things that make them different. And I think it's vital that we have that. Now, it's also vital that we sort of, the people like me and people like yourselves, when you get a little bit older, that we're this and the adults in the room, and we try to steer those cultural exchanges. Because if it just becomes young men or young women, so, going, I'm the best, nobody gets anything out of that. But if you can play for 40, 50, 90 minutes against somebody and you can get to know people, I think, it's a huge, like, you can't hate people that you know. Okay, you can talk about the other, and you can talk about people from India, and you can talk about people from Pakistan or from Ireland or Britain. But ultimately, when you get to know them, the hatred falls away. And one of the best ways to get to know anybody is to play any sort of a sport with them. And football is such a universal language that it's absolutely a perfect bridge for building those strong bonds within community.
Yeah, like definitely. And it's not just football, right? Like sport for that matter. Like sport is like a language as itself, right? If you think of it as you can say something akin to art for that matter. Like it's you don't need to know the language to be able to play it, or for that matter. Like if you can just have a bunch of people who don't speak the same language, just stick a ball together, and then they just develop that understanding. And that's what both me and Sai love about sport for that matter. And that's why we are pursuing careers in sport for that matter, because we believe in the power of sport as a as this beautiful thing which brings people together.
I'm afraid the internet is very unstable again where I am. So I think you were saying there that she said football is like a language, and I couldn't agree more. Everywhere I go in the world, I've ended up playing football against somebody. I ended up playing a game in Ukraine against Robert Pires, who used to play for Arsenal side. That was the longest afternoon of my life. You'd run into people in Turkey, in Brazil. I played futsal in Brazil with Recife, who were the Brazilian champions in 2014. And like, you don't need to be able to talk to people. Your feet do the talking, the ball does the talking, your body language does the talking, and it's so much fun to be able to do that. And I suppose that's really what the Euros is going to be. Now with 16 teams involved, that's what it's going to be over the next month here in Switzerland. You're going to get, it's great to see teams like Poland are involved for the first time, Wales are involved for the first time, European champions, England are there, World and Nations League champions, Spain, and everybody in between. And let's not forget, this is Europe. These people were at war 80 years ago. And indeed, if Russia hadn't been kicked out, you could have had a situation where countries that are currently at war would have been in there. So it is that universal language. And I think these platforms or these spaces are very, very valuable to us in terms of diplomacy and in terms of getting to know the other.
Yeah, I think, and you also mentioned how women's sports in particular poses as a safe space for refugees and people who flee their countries because of war. And Nadia Nadeem is a great example of this. She and her family fled from Afghanistan and came to Denmark, and now she plays for the Danish national team. She's playing for Hammarby, I think, currently. And another
Yeah,
Afghan player, Khalida
she's in the
Popal,
squad.
she
Yeah.
also moved to Denmark. Yeah, she also moved to Denmark, and I think, uh, speaking on the subject of Palestine, a Palestinian female player, I'm, I hope I don't butcher her name, but Hani Taliye, I think she currently works for FIFA and uses football to promote peace and so bringing communities together. So I think that was a very good point as to how women's sport in particular also is uh, a space where people feel safe enough to express themselves and use it as a tool to develop themselves in conditions that are in conditions that weren't made for them, but they make it their own and they thrive in it.
I remember talking to Pia Sundhage, who's the coach of Switzerland, and I was asking her, maybe it was probably 6 years ago. And I said to her, "What do you think, Pia, ahead of the World Cup in France?" I said, "Is this the breakthrough?" And she says, "Phil, if I had $1 for every time I thought this was going to be the breakthrough, I'd be a wealthy woman, you know." And then it happened because finally women did. That tournament was very much a breakthrough. And I know, and then England winning, of course, in 2022 was a huge thing for the game, you know. So now women do belong in that space. They have taken their space there. And that's not going to go away. Nobody's ever going to be able to take that off them again. People can say what they like and they complain about goalkeepers and, oh, you should use smaller balls and smaller goals. All those arguments will have to be had again and again and again for maybe another 10 years. But we're already so far along the road of these things that it doesn't matter anymore. This snowball is rolling down the hill and it's just gathering momentum. And I do think that you mentioned there the Palestinian women's team. They travelled to Dublin, where I'm from, and the club that I supported as a boy there, Bohemians FC. They played Bohemians FC in Dalymount Park, where I would have spent a lot of time watching football as a young kid. And there's a great documentary online about it. I'll see if I can send you a link, maybe you can put it in the show notes. But it was one of those beautiful things because there was such a set. Nobody cared about the results. Nobody cared about what anybody did. All they cared about was bringing everybody together and playing the damn game. And if we put more effort into doing that and less effort into talking absolute nonsense about borders and weapons and budgets and tariffs and all that kind of thing, we sort out the world's problems in a heartbeat. But it's not. It doesn't seem to be in everybody's interest to do that. But again, I like to think that there's far more of us. There's far more people who love sport, and in particular women's sport, than of the other kind of people who would push those things down. So that's why I have a very positive outlook in the future.
Yeah, definitely, Philip. I think like one question which it just came up during the course of our discussion also. So like me and Sai, we've been reading this book called 1312 by James Montague about like among the ultras, and there's this particular chapter which he wrote about Swedish ultras in general, and it is generally for men's football. I just want to know what is the fan culture like for Swedish women's football? Is it like as heavy as it is for men's side of it, or it's like maybe it's a notch or two below?
Yeah, it certainly can be, actually. So if you look at the support that Hammarby give their women's football team, it's almost on a par of what the men's team get. And if you saw the way they were supported, especially in their away games in the Champions League, it was absolutely staggering. BK Häcken down in Gothenburg, they would also be, they have a very, very strong culture of supporting the women's team there. Gordon, who are another sort of team from the city centre, they would be the posh team. They would be the team that would be seen to be a little bit wealthy and that kind of thing. They don't have that kind. Now, those kinds of fans, the ultras will turn up at the derby games, but they won't turn up, if they're playing second from bottom, third from bottom. And that to me is a shame because the people, the ultras in particular, and the more hardcore fans, they say they love the club, right? But right now, what I'm saying is, you love the men's team. That's what you love. You don't love the club. Because if you love the club, you'd be down there watching the under-19 girls, and you'd be down there watching the SSC Warsland and Apollo and all these great players that they have at the moment, And now I would like to see a situation, because it's not up to me to decide, right? We have to remember that some of us are coming to women's football in many cases many years after those who are currently running the game, who are the sporting directors, who are the coaches, who are the administrators of this, right? The game is theirs, right? We have to sort of tailor the way we want the game to be. They were the originators. They were the innovators, right? And we can't copy and paste an ultras culture in the way that you might get in Serie A, for instance. I don't think that's going to help anybody, right? Because if you put in like space for that sort of macho thing that goes on a lot of the time in ultras culture, then you are going to make LGBTQ plus people feel unwelcome. And you cannot have that in the women's game because they were the fan base for so long. So I think we have to be careful what we wish for. But I'm all for these displays like you get from Hammarby and from WEURO and from AIK. I don't mind a flare every now and again. I do mind when 50 of them are lit at once and I can't see shit in the press box, right? But I do like that atmosphere. I do love the banners. I do love the songs. And the Hammarby fans are they're brilliant altogether. And it's great to see more and more fans traveling abroad for games. I know one fan here who loves Magdalena Eriksson, and she's travelled from her home in Germany, in Munich, to Switzerland today to watch Magdalena Eriksson train. That's fantastic. You wouldn't get that 15, 20 years ago. People wouldn't have had the opportunity. If you said at work, oh, look, I need a day off. I need to go see my favourite female football player train. They would not only would they sack you on the spot, they'd probably have you committed to a mental institution. But now that's okay. Now a boss would say, you know what, you go do that. That's good for you. I like that for you. You go knock yourself out, you know. So I do think the fan culture is great, but we need to make sure that kept as a very inclusive thing, because you know yourselves, right? If people from the subcontinent come to the UK to watch the Women's Super League or to watch that, and you'll often get this, oh, here come the tourists, and they're pushing up the ticket price and all that. No. You guys grew up with this, right? This is the only thing the British Empire ever gave you, this in cricket, that was actually any use, right? You have as much right to support Manchester United, Liverpool and Arsenal and Bournemouth as everybody else in this world. As Irish people, we do the same thing. So if we can manage to keep it as inclusive as that, then I don't think we're going too far.
Yeah, so I think we're at the fag end. Sai, you want to add something?
No, I just wanted to know, do you think there is a connection between the amount of, I think Hammarby fans are one of the best fan groups across Europe for the women's game, at least. Not counting Arsenal and Barcelona when they show up consistently. But the support and the noise that the Hammarby fans bring to the women's games, and they travel, they flood the streets, etc. Do you think that's had an effect on the success of the Hammarby team lately?
I absolutely do, because I know how much the girls love it. Ellen Bangerheim, who's going to be playing for Sweden at this European Championship, it's the first thing she talks about after every game is how the fans lift them, right? And that might be, the Damallsvenskan where they play in a place called Canal Plan, but when they play at the Tele2 Arena and you're playing against Barcelona and Manchester City, that does, no fan can make you better at football overnight, but they can give you energy. And what you need when you're playing the best teams in Europe is energy, and they really performed, like they outperformed themselves at home. And then they took it on the road. So they see like these 2, 3, 4, 5,000 nutcases from Stockholm in Barcelona in November. It's like, what do you do? Do you not have Christmas presents to buy? Like, why are you spending all this money? And it also puts it up to other fans in the league. So AIK and Djurgården, who are the other two Stockholm clubs, will be looking at that going, hey, we got to get our people out now as well. We have to match them. They have their tifos, they have their different arrangements they put up and that kind of thing, coloured paper. It's fantastic visual spectacle. And the rising tide lifts all boats because people get involved then. And once they've done it once, they want to be involved every week and every season.
Yeah, that's actually quite a great point, and I hope it does serve as not a reminder, but an example for the other teams to also step up their game in terms of fan culture and the other things. So, moving on to slightly more recent events, we all know FIFA announced that the Women's World Cup was also going to expand to 48 teams. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm not a big fan of that side because I do think that getting to the World Cup should be a prize, right? If 1 in 4 teams that enter it can actually get to the finals, I don't think that's you're not joining an exclusive club. I thought that 32 was probably too many. Maybe you could have a 32 team World Cup maybe in 10 or 12 years time. I get the argument that Thailand learned a lot from losing 13-0 to the USA. It opens up for countries like India, like Afghanistan, for countries that maybe otherwise wouldn't get into the World Cup. But I don't know. I think there are better ways to improve football globally than just inviting everybody to the party, right? I still think that you have to say to people, look, kind of like the Olympics. Like, okay, if you want to get good at this sport, that's fine, right? Take Ireland in sailing or in rowing or these kinds of things. They became very good at that because two guys won a medal in Rio back in the day. Then everybody started doing it. But they did it on the sports terms, right? But if you start to sort of change things and include too many teams, and I believe the same thing on the men's side, like, when you have 48 teams in the tournament, it's now more difficult to miss the UEFA European Championships for men than it is to actually qualify. And that to me takes away the magic of it, because when I was growing up, the European Championships was 8 teams. So you had to be one of the top teams in Europe to get there. And I think that for the Euros, I know they want to get, more games. I know they want to get more TV time. I know they want to get more exposure. 16 teams for me was perfect for the women's game. 24 teams at a stretch. Okay. 32, it's getting nuts. And then to talk about 48, as I say, it's great. More people can call themselves World Cup footballers and that kind of thing. But I don't want to see the quality of the whole thing diluted, because when I was watching the women's game, before anybody was doing it, we would have so many group games of the European Championship or a World Cup where nobody went. And if you can't create that interest, you're not creating stars in that moment. And it can be very disheartening to go out and play in front of 2,500, and then the host nation plays the next night in front of 40,000, and then the following night you play against 4,000. In an arena, it probably should take more. I was saying to my colleague, Iceland and Finland probably won't get the biggest crowd. It's unfortunate. They're two really good teams, and they deserve to have a sold-out stadium on the first day of the tournament. They're probably not going to get it, And that, I think, we need to peel away a little bit of that for now, until we have teams that show us, okay, we can go. Not only can we go there, but we can actually, we can be a Poland and threaten to get out of that group on our own merits.
Yeah, definitely. I think one more unintended consequence would be like the big teams, right? The so-called bigger teams. It's much easier for them to get into the World Cup now, right? It's like maybe a walkover of sorts. Like they really don't need to do much, like unless they colossally fuck up. Like they really are getting an easy entry to a thing. So you don't get those, like in the men. Like I'm speaking from the men's side of it. You don't get those stories where like, I mean, sorry to mention this, but like how Ireland almost defeated France, and due to like
I was there.
Yeah. Oh yeah, like I'm sorry to bring up that bad memory, but like you get those moments, which live long in the memories of your team, doing the impossible against this mighty team and stuff like that. You don't get the Italy's, missing out on World Cups in consecutive editions, because they lost to Northern Macedonia and other teams for that matter. So I think it takes away from that storyline also in a way, and not just the smaller teams just getting easier access, the bigger teams also getting easier access as a result. I think.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the Nations League, if you look at Group A at the moment, like, so the very top rank on the women's side, you can lose all your games in the group stage and you still get a playoff to stay in Group A. What are we playing for? There has to be some sort of jeopardy. We mentioned at the very beginning of this conversation that you're better off to be playing games that mean something. Now Ireland played against the USA twice over the weekend. I think they got beaten 4-0 twice as well, and that's okay. The girls will learn a lot from it. I don't see the value of the exercise. And at the end of a long season, traveling all the way across the Atlantic to get your ass whipped twice for the USA, what is the USA learning from it? Okay, they can have some fun with Trinity Rodman or whoever else they decide to play in a new position or whatever. But again, if you're playing, like, I'd nearly play tournaments more often, or play different varieties of tournaments. We have the Olympic tournament, which is brilliant on the women's side. Then we have the Euros, we have the different continental championships, and then we have the World Cup. I think that's pretty good, right? If we can develop the club competitions now in Asia to the level that the Women's Champions League is at, I know FIFA is looking at that. I think that will sort of improve the game, because essentially we don't want to feed into that myth that women's football is no good. And I saw Auckland getting beaten in the men's side, by 10-0 or something by somebody. Nobody gains from that, really. So, and certainly in the short term, I think we should keep it like a little bit more exclusive for now, until players from India are playing in 10 different women's Super League clubs, and 4 of them are playing in Spain and 6 of them are playing in Germany. And that's no disservice now to the Indian Super League there, but to do that and to bring players on that way, then you have proof of concept. Then you know that you have players that you can bring to a major tournament like Wales. Are Wales going to win it? No. But they are going to cause problems for people here. And that's the way I would like to see it, rather than just deciding, 48 teams, let's roll.
Yeah, definitely. So I think we are right now at the fag end of our podcast, and I think it's bringing back to something a little bit on the pitch now. So as you know, Sweden are in the group of death, with Germany, with Denmark, and with tournament debutants, Poland for that matter. So, what do you think they will do in this tournament? And any exciting players or players which we need to keep a special eye on?
Yeah, I think that Sweden actually have to go all out and try and win this group, right? Because I think that France are probably going to win England's group, and I don't want France playing Sweden. I don't think that's a good matchup for them. I think if Sweden win and England come second, I think Sweden can beat them. I think Sweden have enough experience in that team now, and they have some very exciting young attacking players that weren't really clicking the last time at the Euros. And Sweden have had this for a little while. Sweden have always had, a very sort of reliable goal scorer. Go back to Lotta Schelin back in the day. You had somebody who was always going to get you a goal every game. Now, and then you had a defence that was going to make sure that you didn't concede more than a goal as well. It's been a little bit up and down in recent years since Lotta retired. Stina Blackstenius, as we know, is like a great goal scorer and that kind of thing, but she needs an awful lot of chances to score one of them. I think that this Sweden team can do very, very well indeed. I do think that they need to win that group because that will give them a sort of easier path to the final. If I was to look down through the list of players, there's some tremendous young players in there. I mentioned Ellen Bangaheim is in there. Smilla Holmberg, who's a fantastic defender. You have Magdalena Eriksson, of course, who's a Chelsea legend and now at Bayern Munich. You got a couple. I love Hannah Dennison, who's playing in the centre midfield as well. Hannah, she had a couple of touches the other night that were just outstanding. And then Fridolina Rolfö doesn't really look like she's going to be fit at the moment. But Johanna Lindin Connolly has become a completely different player during the few years that she's been at Chelsea. She's developed enormously. And then, of course, you have Kosovare Aslani. Last but not least, Jennifer Falcon goal is brilliant with her feet as well. And she's just a great sense of humour, great person to have around the place. So they have leaders, like through all the age groups and through every part of the team, they have leaders there. And this is the last chance for a lot of these Swedish players who are the wrong side of 30, like my good self. This is the last chance now. And I think they will do well because I think they're going to promise one another that whatever happens, it's not going to be their fault they go out. They're not going to leave anything and say, oh, we should have done this, or I should have taken that run, or I should have made that. No. They are going out there now because they know that this could be the last time that this group gets to do this together.
Yeah, I think that point which you make, right? Like I think Sweden are pretty well balanced, right? In terms of the age curve also throughout the squad. I think they have a good mix of probably experience and youth also, if I'm not wrong. I think Sai can speak to that, but I mean, is that true?
Yeah, no, they definitely, I think, have a good mix of the experience and the youth. And the youth are also experienced in a lot of ways. Like you spoke about Hannah Bennison, she's had experience playing across the continent a lot now. She went to England, now she's in Italy. There are a lot of experienced youth as well, and that's obviously down to Sweden being able to produce these kind of youth players that get the competition back in Sweden. So I think it is a good mix. So I actually hope Sweden does well because when I was thinking about the Euros, I was thinking about how this year has been the year of the underdogs, and Sweden always comes close, and they fall short and they end up second, right? So I was thinking maybe this could be Sweden's year. Maybe Magdalena Eriksson leads them all the way to the final, and she can help them win.
I'll tell you something. One of the worst nights of my professional life, Si, was at the Olympic final when they played against Canada and lost on penalties in Tokyo. And you literally couldn't talk to the girls afterwards because they were so devastated. And since then, Caroline Seger, one of the greatest players ever to play the game, Hedvig Lindahl, one of the greatest goalkeepers in history. You had so many players who retired after that, and who are never going to get that chance again. And there's so many people that, I'm supposed to be impartial and that kind of thing, but I would just wish for them to get that one gold medal. And I would wish for Swedish football to get it as well, because it's an affirmation that they're trying to do things the right way. They may not always get it right, but they're trying to do things the right way. And it really is, this is one of those show me your medals businesses, right? Are Spain doing the right thing? Damn straight they're doing the right thing. They won the World Cup, they won the Nations League, and they could very well win the Euros as well. But Sweden deserve a chance. And if they give it absolutely everything they have, I would say they're fifth favourites as far as I know with the bookmakers. So I do think they're in with a shout now, causing a surprise, especially if they manage to top that group C.
So I think hopefully this time Sweden are the brides instead of the bridesmaids this time. So they
exactly
they take it home, and hopefully I hope they do well as a result of speaking to you as well, and you get to know. Also, I didn't think of them as like this team to beat, but now that you've spoken about them, I think I'm also cluing into them. I mean, my team is Wales, but I think Sweden will be like my second team after this.
set the alarm clock, Ashish. These girls are going to do some fantastic things in this tournament, and I don't want you to miss it, my friend.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, again, uh, we're honored to have you on this podcast. You know, we had like such a great time having such a nuanced discussion about, you know, sport in Sweden in general, especially women's sport for that matter, and how, you know, there's this connection between sport and society in Sweden. And we would love to have you on in a future podcast in the future, maybe for something Ireland related, if Ireland are, you know, fortunate to make any tournaments in the future. So hopefully, like I think you're hoping also for the Ireland thing, but like we would love to have you on.
I'm on my knees at the
yeah.
moment praying for these things, but I'll definitely come back on at some point in the future. We can talk Ireland or Sweden or Norway, whatever you guys want to talk about. I'll be more than happy to do it.
Definitely, yeah. So thank you so much, and guys, please like, subscribe, and you know, drop a comment to this video, and stay tuned for the next episode in this podcast.